Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and greetings to all the other panelists. I think we are gathered here tonight. I'm in Beijing in a very important and amusing discussion. I think there are so many things involved in this situation, and I'm not going to go into all the details. Suffice to make several very important points. One is that the US dropped the extradition request, and eventually Meng Wanzhou became a free man again. She is back in China. She's been very successful, and Huawei has really bounced back, and it's leading the charge of technological renovation and innovation in many important respects. The United States and some of its allies have bombarded Huawei or Meng Wanzhou with a lot of accusations of espionage or threat against national security. They have failed in coming up with any substantiated accusation against either Huawei or Meng Wanzhou. That's the first point. The second point is that while the Chinese government has insisted from the very beginning that the arrest of the two Michaels of Canada have nothing to do with the arrest by the Canadian Authority of Meng Wanzhou and the requested extradition of Meng Wanzhou back to the United States. My personal view is that philosophically, under the heaven, everything is related to everything else. I'm not going to contradict the statement of the Chinese government, but we should bear in mind this philosophical point. And the fact that the two Michaels and Meng Wanzhou were kind of released and flown out of Canada for Meng Wanzhou and for the two Michaels out of China, almost highly synchronized on the same day, indicated there must be something related to these two cases, while the Chinese government has insisted that they are not related. Now, the third point is that the Canadian government has insisted from the very beginning of the arrest of the two Michaels that these two Michaels had nothing to do with intelligence or espionage. And I think for a while, the rest of the world, especially the Western world, seemed to be completely siding by the representations of the Canadian government. Now, it has been quite a few years after Meng Wanzhou came back to China and the two Michaels went back to Canada, and I'm very happy for the two Michaels. After all, they were in the Chinese system for about 1,000 days, and I hope they have thoroughly enjoyed their freedom back in Canada. And now the very important point, that is, the two Michaels are now at kind of a litigation against each other, and Mr. Spavor clearly insisted that he was misused by Mr. Kovrig for gathering intelligence for the Canadian government. Now, we do not need to go into every aspect of their representations against each other. Suffice it to say, now I think the rest of the world will be able to have the better version of the truth. And the truth, philosophically, is always an evolving thing. It's like an onion. It depends on how many peels you can peel off from the onion. Is that right? So I think my point is that eventually it ended up with great pleasure for the two Michaels back in Canada enjoying their freedom, and for Madame Meng Wanzhou back in China as one of the very successful high-tech executive in China as well as in the world. And for whatever legal problems there are between the two Michaels and between the two Michaels versus the Canadian government, I hope there is a process in Canada, and hopefully the Canadian government will do the right thing to compensate the two Michaels for whatever they did in China. And I think the Canadian government probably is also very much concerned about the continued litigation between the two Michaels and against the Canadian government for more details to be thrown out into the open, which may or may not reflect well on either the Canadian system or on the representations they made for so many years about what the two Michaels were doing in China. And I hope eventually the dust will settle and the world will be restoring peace and quietness. And eventually China and Canada will get along with each other, and China and the United States will eventually embrace what I've been called the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. And on this occasion, finally, also allow me to emphasize one point. And that is, this technological war against China is not making any sense because China is here, China is growing, and China is making its own important technological strides forward. And eventually, China and the United States need to get along with each other. And I hope in that overall context, Canada will play a role of good offices rather than betting everything on the American side against China, especially if China is not doing the wrong thing, and especially if China is doing amicable things for the progress of technology and for international cooperation. I will stop here and I will be all ears listening to the other panelists.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.